Hello everyone. Today we have a protagonist who does live streams in another world to earn money and even win over various girls. But before I tell you everything, don't forget to leave a like. The story begins with a traveler, the chosen son in various tales. This traveler, coming from another world, possesses the ability to move mountains and fill seas, as well as to defeat gods and Buddhas. Using his modern-day knowledge, he exterminates armies in a different world, and thanks to a talent that makes him invincible, or perhaps his endless lovers, he ends up conquering the goddess and triumphing in his existence. His name is Liso, an 18-year-old youth, and today he officially becomes a traveler. On the western border of the Sao Empire, a voluptuous female figure runs, accompanied by a few knights fleeing from goblins. One of the knights yells at the young woman in front to keep going, as a village is nearby, but soon an arrow strikes him. The goblins close in mercilessly. The only remaining knight and the young woman, realizing the situation, cast a powerful spell with a magic staff, freezing the goblins. Observing the result of her attack, the young woman reveals her cold nature, a skill acquired from the ice demon. This girl is Sophia, daughter of the Grand Duke Fadin, with an elemental level of 3. The knight notices that Sophia has exhausted her energy with the spell, and that her tattoo mark has started bleeding, signaling that something is about to happen. The knight insists that Sophia must survive, as she is the only one with the blood of the Grand Duke. The princess recalls that everything began because of a principality that destroyed all the others, and now she seeks revenge. Despite the pressure, she tries to stay calm as more goblins approach in fury. The knight stands before her, determined to protect the princess. At that moment, a goblin fires an arrow, hitting the knight, who screams in pain. With no options left, the knight and the princess join forces in an attack. But while they are surrounded, a goblin leaps from a tree, attacking the princess. She tries to stay calm, but the impact's force overpowers her. The knight realizes what's happening, but is also injured in the leg, and the goblins, enraged, defeat her. The princess watches the scene and apologizes to the knight, named Sarah, before being surrounded by all the goblins, who subdue her as she screams desperately for release. She knows she's in trouble, feeling vulnerable under the goblins' lustful gaze, and, in a moment of despair, wishes for someone to save her, even if it's an evil god. Willing to sacrifice everything, she notices a strange silhouette falling from the sky, and wonders if it's a god. The goblins notice it too, but soon the silhouette crashes into them, surprising the princess, who, perplexed, recognizes the figure. Standing over the defeated goblins, she exclaims that he is an evil and insane god. Confused and nervous, Sophia realizes she's naked, while the being in front of her doesn't understand what's happening, hearing congratulations for linking to the live streaming system. He wonders how he ended up there after falling from the sky. Observing the goblins' corpses, the system identifies him as a host and informs him that the broadcasting camera is linked to his eyes, which can be turned off after 8 hours of daily streaming. The young man, our protagonist, is completely lost. Half an hour earlier, at a construction site, an irritated manager yells the protagonist's name, threatening to fire anyone who doesn't show up in 3 seconds. A motorcyclist arrives, revealing himself as Liso, who apologizes for being late. The manager, knowing he was delivering food again, complains about the lack of progress on the project. At that moment, 2 workers approach, mocking him and reminding him that his gambling addict father left them in debt and disappeared, while his mother is seriously ill, and his younger sister is struggling financially at university. Thus, the responsibility falls on Liso. They ask if he's willing to lose his job, and one of them suggests that Liso take over their tasks. Inside the construction site, Liso welcomes his livestream audience, lifting materials and showing off his muscles. However, he realizes he has no views or followers, except for one fan who's been with him from the start and a platform bot. He recalls a man with an umbrella who offered him a streaming contract, promising money, but with strict conditions that required long hours of broadcasting. Nevertheless, he needs the money and continues to stream, despite the monthly charge of 2,000 yuan. Elsewhere, a girl with glasses laughs, finding his broadcast amusing. Meanwhile, Liso worries about the debts he can't pay and the henchmen who demand what his father owes. Determined not to give up, he remembers his sick mother and his sister who needs help, cursing the collectors and seeking motivation. A comment in the chat suggests that the background is fake, and thinking about his sister, Liso has an outburst and throws his phone. Regretting it, he rushes to retrieve it but can't understand how he jumped so high. Irritated, he decides he can't let things end this way, as his family's debts are still unpaid. Now, back to the present. Liso finds himself transformed, having defeated the goblins. The mage princess watches to see if he is truly the evil god she summoned, and in the confusion, tries to calm down. She recalls that her master said some god's costs aren't too high. Meanwhile, Liso wonders if he'll be able to understand her language, but the translation system will work automatically. The princess thanks him for saving her, offering her respects, while chat viewers are astonished by the young woman's beauty and realism. The protagonist is surprised by the young woman's beauty and, nervous, greets her. However, the sound of footsteps interrupts the moment, causing them both to turn forward. Before them, an imposing Goblin Lord appears, mocking and accusing the protagonist of exterminating his subordinates. The young woman, perplexed by the goblin's presence, recalls that according to legends, they possess such great strength that they can decapitate a royal knight with a single blow, and their bodies are resilient enough to withstand attacks from even powerful beasts. At this moment, the protagonist notices an increase in viewers and followers commenting on the goblin's imposing presence. However, he worries, as he's now in a complicated situation without being prepared. He tries to activate his traps, but the system informs him that the lottery is still unavailable. The audience, doubting Liso's bravery, begins to cheer him on to fight. Meanwhile, his first fan, hearing the protagonist laments not having a lucky weapon, smiles at an idea, and launches a mission for him to defeat Mr. Goblin, leaving Liso confused. His fan, who just subscribed, demands he face the boss. Frightened, Liso tries to explain it's not a game and that he just fell from a building, but the chat insists he doesn't flee and fights, or risks losing his subscriber. The system informs him that he earned 198, resulting in 19.8 yuan. With each mission completed, he can activate the lottery card system, costing the value of a subscription, but he may only choose one card, making him even more nervous. The goblin, annoyed by the protagonist's ignorance, decides to attack fiercely. Desperate, Liso accepts the mission, and suddenly, 10 cards appear before him. He draws a golden dragon pill, promising to move mountains and seas, though it looks like dung. Frustrated, he wonders how to use it as Mr. Goblin tries to crush his head. The princess screams in terror, but unexpectedly, something stops the goblin's attack. To everyone's surprise, Liso transforms into an imposing figure, and, with one blow, shatters the goblin's weapon into 1,000 pieces. In his new splendor, resembling a deity, he scorns the goblin. With fire emanating from his hand, Liso commands the beast to die. The goblin, stunned, can't believe the scene, and the protagonist's attack pierces his body, instantly eliminating him. At that moment, it's revealed that in the continent of Kandia, humans are dominant under the Church of Light's leadership, protecting people from the fury of the Abyss demons. In this abyss, 3 powerful demonic gods plotting world destruction can only send their minions to corrupt and invade the human world. These evil beings, who carry out sacrifices, are known as Cthulhus. Meanwhile, a burning orc questions why the evil gods abandoned him. The protagonist's power is evident, leaving the goblin reduced to nothing. The princess, shocked, can't believe a Goblin Lord was defeated with a single spell. She has never witnessed such powerful fire magic and reflects on the price of invoking a demonic god with such intensity. At this moment, the system informs Liso that his new body can't withstand the dragon pill, causing an intense heat sensation. The system warns that upon consuming the pill for the first time, he may explode and die. Panicked, Liso searches for a solution and, looking at the young girl, asks the system what option is available. The system reveals he needs to absorb the essence of her ice blood. Nervously, the protagonist touches the princess's face and, to his surprise, kisses her. The young girl reacts, and a strange mark becomes visible on her feet. A sinister voice laughs, saying sacrifices won't escape the mark of vengeance. The princess feels intense pain, and a portal opens behind her. The mark of the demonic god questions who she is, while the protagonist appears in his divine form, glaring at the mark disdainfully. In a powerful move, he expels the mark from her body. Now freed, the princess realizes the seal has been suppressed and feels a wave of mana flooding her body, raising her elemental level from 3 to intermediate. The chat goes wild with the kiss scene, but the princess remains uneasy. When Liso finally returns to his normal state, the young girl faints, haunted by thoughts of her father's debts. She worries about her mother's health and fears that her sister, without money, may have to abandon her studies. Liso, already awake, shouts his sister's name, but to his surprise, discovers his head is between the princess's legs, and she realizes he is conscious. Liso, the god of chaos, becomes aware of the situation and blushes, noticing her beauty, while the chat comments on his thoughts. The young girl says she prepared a tent waiting for him to wake up and thanks him for not being killed. Embarrassed, the protagonist apologizes for falling asleep in her lap and introduces himself. Confused, the princess suggests he wait while she fetches water. Relieved, Liso tries to remember what happened before he fainted. Outside, the princess considers he may have a hideout in the abyss of chaos, and since he kissed her without spreading evil, she begins to think he could be a peculiar god of lust. Recalling where the protagonist lives, he doesn't understand from which layer of the abyss of chaos he comes. Even so, the girl will forget her noble status as the Grand Duke's daughter, and, having nothing more, will serve the protagonist so he can protect her. The voluptuous woman believes he is a territorial, evil god, so she will find a way to speak with him and form an equal contract, as only then can she take revenge on the one who took everything from her. Meanwhile, in the tent, the protagonist informs his viewers that they saw how he traveled to another world and asks them to please call the police. But people don't believe him and only ask for the game's name. Immediately, the protagonist asks the system to see the interface, and it opens. He's surprised to have a dragon lineage. Everyone observes the protagonist's data in this world, and the system explains that dragon lineage is supportive, meaning he will eventually transform into a dragon in 3 days. Terrified, the protagonist wants to be saved, and the system informs him that whenever he buys the mysterious dragon system, he will learn to control dragon blood. The store's price is like a subscription, and as there's another subscriber, he buys it. Surprised with the product, he obtains 10 very powerful items, each different. Liso is astonished and immediately dons the clothes, also learning the Gilon Swangongjin Sutra successfully. He can learn more sutras, and as he draws more, his brocade robe's level increases. Back at the level of the Mysterious Dragon Sutra and his self-cultivation, the passive and active effects and consequences are revealed. The system informs him that this self-cultivation practice divides into 7 stages, each with 3 levels: entry, ascension, and consummation. Only with this cultivation can he transform into a feather that crosses the void and returns to Earth. The protagonist understands it's a long-term process, and first, he needs to find a way to make money. He remembers he has more items and notes that he has a kettle that, when drunk from, can rejuvenate, along with beans that transform into soldiers, a pill that restores blood, a fruit that restores spiritual power, and some spheres that, when eaten, can cause gas. Finally, he has the Sumeru ring, which allows him to store special objects in 10 cubic meters. The protagonist will investigate the other items later, but for now, he will use only the Sumeru ring. Feeling the power, he thinks the outfit is quite fitting and earns the title of Chi Trainer, entering the realm of union. Using the Sura of Lonan, he transforms his hand into a dragon's, emanating a powerful dark energy that surprises the entire audience in the broadcast. The spectators exchange fireworks, and the system suggests he test them. The protagonist agrees, and at that moment, the princess returns, watching in surprise at the power emanating from him. Upon seeing her, he smiles, and for this, the girl kneels before the mighty Liso, begging him to quell his wrath. Princess Sia feels the protagonist's gaze pierce her mind, and she finds herself unable to move, though this is due to the fireworks effect, which reveals a person's truth. She knows her thoughts about the contract have been exposed, so she gets straight to the point and, determined, begins to speak with him. The voluptuous princess reveals her name is Farancia Sophia, daughter of the Grand Duke of Bestland. She explains that her principality and her family were sacrificed to the god of the abyss by a traitorous Illuminati, and that she was pursued. With her guards killed, she is willing to serve him and asks him to take her to Landa City and help her. The protagonist can't believe she wants to be his servant. Wondering where Landa City is, he thinks this is an issue, as he first needs to earn money for his family. Therefore, he decides to act in a way to refuse her and says it comes at a high price. He adds that she knows what he wants. Miss Sophia understands and will do anything for revenge, believing him to be the god of lust. Before the protagonist, the voluptuous woman exposes her chest, and the protagonist, not understanding anything, asks what she is doing. Immediately, he turns around, taken aback, while the princess wonders if he finds her unattractive. Liso, exhausted and disbelieving, doesn't know what to do and begins to sweat nervously. Meanwhile, in the chat, viewers make improper comments. Elsewhere, a girl intrigued by what's happening presses a few keys. Her username is The Queen, and she donates 30 Jones, saying she will subscribe if he accepts Princess Sophia's mission. She is a beautiful woman, the CEO of a company, and didn't expect to see such an interesting broadcast while working. The protagonist, grateful for the money, feels happy, as his mission is to gain 100 followers for a subscription. At that moment, Liso remembers that, as the broadcast is connected to reality, he can withdraw the money in cash, which will allow him to pay his debts while streaming, happily imagining being at the top of life. Meanwhile, Princess Sophia tries to stay calm before the approach of the demon god, who holds her and declares he's moved by her sincerity. He promises to accompany her on her journey, exclaiming he is a knight, though he bleeds from his nose. The girl thinks he truly is a lustful god, but she still expresses her gratitude and promises to serve him as a member of her lord's household. The chat explodes with reactions, and the system informs him that he has completed the task imposed by the broadcast room manager, gaining 100 followers and a new subscription. Suddenly, the protagonist's stomach rumbles, and Sophia, noticing this, offers to feed her lord. Half an hour later, the dish she prepared is revealed, and the protagonist questions if it's truly edible. The princess apologizes, explaining that, as a noble, she was always pampered and never learned to cook. However, the protagonist, gently, assures her it's no problem and that he will cook himself. The young woman is incredulous at the proposal. Liso then asks her to help him fetch water. Taking out the magic kettle he previously obtained, he requests that the princess fill it. Immediately, she recognizes it as an enchanted item with a spatial attribute, something quite rare. Sophia explains that enchanters are considered the noblest professionals on the continent, being a rarity, 1 in a million, and capable of combining powerful elemental magic with common weapons. Those who master space and time magic are the hardest to find, as are wizards who control them. Impressed by the protagonist's power, the princess can't believe he entrusted her with such a rare water container. However, he asks her to wait a moment and throws one of his corpse beans. When thrown, the bean transforms into a soldier, who explodes, releasing a wicked creature that exclaims its seal has finally been broken. The pair doesn't understand the situation, but the creature that appears is a skeleton, known as the Mountain Kingdom Guardian. The monster questions who the protagonist is. Liso, with a curious look, responds that he will call him Skelet Inn. The skeleton, in turn, thinks the protagonist is crazy for suggesting this name, but soon senses the powerful aura of the Dragon Clan emanating from him, which is stronger than that of his former master. Trembling, the skeleton accepts being called Skelet a Queen. He then asks what the master's order is, and the protagonist, unconcerned, requests he accompany Princess Sophia to the river to fetch water and hunt an animal. Skelet a Queen assures that his strength will make this easy, while the princess bids farewell to the protagonist, who considers chopping wood for the fire. Further ahead, deep in the forest, Skelet leads the mission, and the princess, following him, thinks he's of low level, but seems to have intelligence. She remembers her master telling her that only legendary level corpses resurrected by necromancers can show wisdom. Suddenly, the skeleton urges her on, saying he was once a powerful fighter, with a Taoist name given by the immortal elders. However, the princess sees nothing powerful in him and thinks his previous name was given by an evil god. Meanwhile, Skelet belittles her for her low spiritual power and for thinking the master likes her. Suddenly, he notices something, and they see several birds flying through the forest, meaning something is happening. Elsewhere, a knight shouts to protect a lady, but is soon crushed by a mace, to the horror of his companions, who decide to attack. The captain of the guard is introduced, named Feg Grey, who can hardly believe what you are seeing are the powerful Orcs, sworn enemies of humanity, who are massacring everyone. The Orcs scream to spread fear, and we learn that the Grand Duke of the Western Territory protects the border, where the Orcs live in the prairies of the West Wind, with the amputated clan being one of the 8 main clans. These Orcs, known for embedding the weapons of the defeated, are now massacring everyone, confusing the captain, who does not understand how they invaded the border. Meanwhile, the captain tries to resist the attack and hears the lady scream for help. He calls for Isabella, the woman on top of the carriage, and promises that If she saves the lady, the Baron will accept her request. Quickly, she removes her tunic and, with a jump, shoots an arrow into the face of an orc, killing a few more. Isabella, the voluptuous archer of the deep forest, is introduced. Meanwhile, the Baroness Jennifer screams for her to finish them all off, as they have stained her clothes. She threatens the captain, saying she will ask the master to fire him if he does not fight. The captain, trying to stay calm, just wants her to stop complaining, as they are facing orcs, enemies of the continent. Suddenly, an orc mounted on a beast approaches to attack the captain, but he is thrown back by Isabella, who pushes him away with a powerful kick and then pierces him with an arrow. In the air, the elf, curvaceous and agile, strikes him again, pushing him away. The orc, furious, quickly repositions with his crossbow, focusing on the voluptuous elf, who comments on the difficulty of eliminating mutilated orcs with elemental arrows. Suddenly, someone exclaims they found the food. Surprised by the unexpected news, the skeleton observes, while the captain and the elf try to understand his intentions. Calmly, the skeleton warns the princess that it's time to leave, but she, worried, shouts for him to be careful, as there's an orc above, ready to attack him brutally. However, the small skeleton turns with seriousness, feeling underestimated, and as he firmly grabs the orc's mouth, he declares, "My name is Sun Lan, the guard under the throne of the immortals. Now, my immortal master has named me Skeleton." With that strength, he crushed the head of the nearby wolf. At that moment, another orc appears behind him, but Skeleton summons his sword, stating that this time he will not go easy. He grips the blade firmly and, with a single strike, splits the huge orc in half. Stunned, the remaining orcs can't believe what they just witnessed, while the girls are equally impressed. Imbued with a powerful presence, Skeleton addresses the surviving orcs and, with a challenging look, invites them to attack him all at once. It is explained that, in the world of understanding, each mountain gate has a designated general. These generals, illuminated by the souls of practitioners, receive the title of Mountain Guardians, also called the God of the Mountain. In the current era, the most powerful guardian is Skeleton, acclaimed as one of the greatest generals of the time. In the chat, viewers, surprised, comment on the broadcast that follows the perspective of the protagonist's subordinates, encouraging them to subscribe. In another scenario, the protagonist, while chopping wood, breaks his axe and gets irritated with the tool's fragility. Noticing that donations are being sent, he imagines that people enjoy watching him chop the tree. Returning to the main scene, the elf thanks the princess for summoning Skeleton, but is informed that it was her master who brought him. The princess seems excited about Skeleton's power, while the elf is incredulous that such a powerful creature was summoned by that master. The orcs, terrified, try to flee from Skeleton, but a gigantic figure with a sword blocks the way. A violent slash is heard, and an orc's head rolls. The figure introduces himself as the great warlord of the mutilated orcs, Zygu, who asks if they have already found the remains of the Grand Duke of the West. The girls, in shock, recognize Zygu, the wielder of the powerful sword, and consider fleeing. It is revealed that Zygu is the younger brother of the leader of the mutilated clan, and his achievements are legendary, including the destruction of entire armies and the performance of sacrifices. He also found the mythical magical sword Eryux, making him the most feared orc of the Western Plains. In the chat, viewers are impressed by the orc's imposing presence and cheer for his defeat to take his weapon. Meanwhile, the protagonist receives a donation asking him to keep the powerful weapon. Confused, he believes they are referring to the broken axe. It is then revealed that the orc has already exterminated hundreds of people, performing mass sacrifices on the western prairies, killing thousands to transform into an evil spirit. The war orc proclaims that, by reaping 100,000 lives, he will become the phantom hero, and by defeating powerful swordsmen, he may level up. The elf, terrified, realizes that the orc wields the legendary magical dagger of the 10 deadly blades, called Alox, which exudes a menacing aura. With a fierce expression, the orc declares that he will take everyone's heads as offerings. Raising his flame-wreathed sword, he charges in fury, proclaiming they will serve as sacrifices to the god of slaughter. But Skeleton remains undisturbed. In a cold tone, he comments that he has begun to remember the battlefield. As the orc approaches with its beast, the strongest guardian of the mountain raises his sword, which transforms into the shape of a dragon. He performs a gigantic slash that quickly advances towards the war orc, who screams fiercely. When the strike is completed, the monster's body begins to split in two, leaving the orc perplexed, not understanding how this was possible. From the broken body, Skelet appears calm and collected. The other orcs are shocked, as he defeated a high-level opponent in seconds. Skelet, positioned behind the orc's body, comments that he only used a bit of his strength. From that moment, the orc subordinates, terrified, flee, while Skelet returns to his smaller form, feeling better. He then observes those still there with a serious look and states that they have seen nothing. Suddenly, Pla appears behind Skelet and hugs his leg excitedly, informing him that she found food. The others, stunned, observe the scene. The elf, surprised, cannot understand the protagonist's power level, to the point of having such subordinates. She introduces herself as Isabella and thanks Skelet for saving them. But the protagonist is distracted by her beauty. The two greet each other while the chat, still impressed by the orc's defeat, sees more people subscribing to the channel. The protagonist, confused, wonders if the subscriptions are due to his feat with the trees. Sophia then asks Skelet why he returned, and he explains that his axe broke and that he came to check on what was happening nearby. The cursed sword, noticing Skelet's powerful presence, tries to parasitize him to increase its own power. It advances fiercely towards the protagonist, seeking to suck his blood and dominate him. The girls shout for him not to let the sword touch him, as otherwise he would become its slave. However, the protagonist, observing the sword, holds it without difficulty and wonders why it came towards him. The sword, with a Pac-Man expression, realizes it made a mistake, but soon feels an immense pressure and realizes that the protagonist is completely nullifying its power. Without noticing, the protagonist cheerfully comments that the sword probably cuts wood better than the broken axe, leaving the others petrified, realizing he plans to use a cursed magical sword as a mere axe to cut firewood. Then, at the top of the mountain, Skelet knows the day has ended and analyzes his earnings. After deductions, he is left with 91 yen, which is enough for 5 draws. Although he has amassed many resources, the platform takes a considerable portion, which still prevents him from paying his little sister's 5,000 yen tuition. Additionally, he needs to get stronger. The system repeats that he needs to gain 100 followers for each subscription, while he reads in the chat that they will send him fireworks and suggest he use his subordinates to carry out missions independently. Then, the protagonist finally understands that he can earn more by assigning missions to the girls. The system informs him that the fireworks from the first follower will take effect. While someone calls the protagonist, it is the elf who tells him that dinner is ready. Skelet begins to emanate a hypnotic aura and asks Isabella if she needs help with anything. He stares at her intensely, and the elf, impacted, thinks of using her secret technique to see his hidden talent. She activates her moon eye, a natural talent of elves, but what she sees is something distorted, indescribable. Nervous, she wonders if he has any desire. She cannot believe that such a terrifying high-level existence is by her side. Calmly, the protagonist says to go eat while wondering what the girl was mumbling in her head. However, the elf cannot stop thinking about what she saw about his desire, and the princess asks if she is okay, to which the elf responds nervously that she is, to Sophia's confusion. At the camp, everyone welcomes the protagonist and comments that they will eat the wolf meat captured by his subordinates. The Baroness, smiling, thanks him for his help, and the protagonist, happy, says it is time to eat. He asks Sophia to first serve some tea, and she, incredulous that he uses a magical kettle to serve tea, serves everyone, to the Baroness's discomfort. Still, one of them mentions they must drink in respect to the savior. The elf, fearful, hesitates to accept the drink, wary as it is offered by a dark god like the protagonist, but Skelet assures her that the tea will be beneficial for her. The girls soon smell the pleasant aroma of the tea, and the elf perceives an intense scent of vitality. Although still apprehensive, she understands that it is a special drink, prepared by a powerful and twisted entity. Then, she takes a sip and suddenly feels something profound. The aroma reminds her of the great world tree. Isabella feels as if she is once again enveloped by the embrace of the mother tree, as if a superior force is infusing her with energy, raising her realm to intermediate level 3. The elf mentions the breath of life from the great tree, while the spectators notice the attributes the young woman has enhanced. Skelet then clarifies that it is not the breath of the great tree, but a simple fairy tea, and says that the elf should thank the protagonist. He explains that the golden jade kettle contributes to longevity and personal cultivation, preparing only 3 cups a month. With frequent consumption, it is possible to prolong life. Liso, who was unaware of such effects of the tea, watches as the princess realizes her power has increased by 30%. The elf, impressed, bows to the protagonist, apologizing and thanking him. At that moment, the Baroness, more dazzling than ever, comments that the drink has rejuvenated her, leaving Phaedra surprised, but the woman tells him to be silent as her face changes once more. Liso then declares that it is time to taste the wolf meat, drawing his magic knife to Isabella's surprise, who begins to believe that, with his help, she might be able to fulfill her family's ancient wish, dating back 2,000 years. She implores him to find the World Tree Seed, activating a new quest in the system to gain subscribers. The next day, Phaedra drives the carriage, while Liso, in the back seat, promises the elf that he will help her in her mission. He also talks to the Baroness Jennifer, promising to escort her back to Barontown, and then asks Isabella how exactly he could help her. Isabella introduces herself as an elf of the Golden Moon, Morob, and explains that 2,000 years ago, the world tree began to weaken, leading to the fragmentation of the elves. She explains that it was prophesied that with the fall of the tree, the end of the elves would come. Since then, many elves have been sent to find seeds of the tree in distant lands. She adds that at first, she thought of asking for help from the Baroness's husband, but upon feeling the breath of life emanating from the kettle, possibly connecting her to the world tree, she decided to seek Liso's help. In return, the system informs that he will gain 100 subscribers and 20,000 fans. Liso accepts the quest. At that moment, someone announces that they have arrived at the city of the Great Baron. The protagonist steps out of the carriage, relieved, But in the distance, a cry is heard saying that Helen is not a witch, and a young woman is seen crying. The claimant exclaims that the leader, Rayleigh AF, found a witch and the Baron ordered her to be hanged. The Baron of Best Lands, Lord Mordre Saman, is observed, exclaiming to execute her. But first, it is declared that, by order of the Lord, the one responsible for his wife's disappearance was found. Since the untouchable Helen was related to this witch, she was sentenced to this punishment. The young woman screams that she is not a witch and begs her uncle and aunt to save her, but the Baron asks why they are taking so long to execute her. The servant says they are waiting for his order, so the Lord breaks his goblet and exclaims for them to execute. Helen is lifted, but an arrow soon cuts the rope, causing her to fall into the arms of the protagonist, who wears a serious expression. The young woman, relieved, thanks him. The Baron, surprised, watches Isuso descend and join his subordinates, while the crowd is struck by his appearance. The chat buzzes, praising the protagonist's work and disapproving of the Baron. In another place, in the Lycian group building, a young woman reports good finances to the company's president, known as the protagonist's Queen of the Chat. However, she is distracted by the broadcast and decides to make a donation to help Isuso escape from the lunatic Baron, promising a rocket if he succeeds. At the same time, the protagonist's sister, his first fan, is also amazed by the game's realism. Meanwhile, someone enters her room to watch the broadcast, believing the protagonist to be someone special. The chat continues with congratulatory comments. Suddenly, the Baron's wife shouts, defending that they had nothing to do with the wife's disappearance, claiming it was the Orcs and that the group should be grateful for their help. The Great Nord, understanding the situation, decides to welcome everyone to express his gratitude and invites them to spend the night in the castle. The mission to overthrow Baron Morley is successfully activated, and the protagonist will receive a rocket and a captain, symbolizing a new subscription. Nervous about the prize offered by the wealthy woman, he hopes to attract more rich girls to his broadcast. Meanwhile, Princess Sophia comments on her suspicions of the Baron, while Isuo remains alert. Inside the castle, they are welcomed by the group, and before entering, the protagonist tells Helen that she should return home. The young woman thanks and compliments him before leaving. At that moment, the protagonist notices someone hooded nearby. Helen runs toward the person and calls her sister Alice, causing the princess to notice that she bears the symbol of the Church of Light. A servant then announces that it's time to follow him. The protagonist then reaches his room, where the servant suggests he rest, as there will be a grand banquet as a reward in the evening. Sophia appears at the door, urging the protagonist to rest, and he encourages her to do the same. Alone, the protagonist shows the chat what the inside of a castle looks like. At that moment, he receives a private message from his first fan, who asks if he really teleported. Recognizing who it is, he confirms everything and expresses his gratitude, as her subscription helped him get his first card, saving him from a goblin. He decides to reward her by making her the broadcast room manager with the title of Overseer. But his sister calls him stupid for not understanding the people who care about him. The protagonist knows this and shares that his mother is waiting for him, as well as his little sister. The young woman then asks how he'll return to Earth, and Isuo explains that the system said he needs to become a had. To do so, he must conduct draws that he will get as he levels up in the broadcast room. The room levels are then displayed. Additionally, as he levels up, he'll keep a higher percentage of donations and gain weapons of white, green, blue, and even purple quality. The protagonist needs to gain fans, many subscriptions, conduct draws, gain cards, and complete the red card set to become a had and cross the void to return home. The fan, upon discovering everything, says she'll help him, and the system immediately informs her that, as the new administrator, the protagonist can send something for free. Thus, Isuo decides to send her a skeleton magic bean to give to her sister, protecting her from loan sharks once a day. Informing the fan, he sends the item. Immediately, the young woman's companion informs her that a package has arrived. Confused, she comments that she didn't buy anything, and seeing who sent it, she is very surprised. Isuo learns that the delivery arrived, so his next move is to complete the mission of defeating the Baron and win the rocket. He exclaims that he cannot bear to see people exploited by feudal tyrants. At this moment, someone knocks on his door. 2 maids ordered by the Baron to assist him with his bath. The protagonist wonders if the Lord wants to test his weaknesses. Behind one of the maids, he notices that she hides claws, thinking she'll be an easy prey. In fact, both draw their claws. In the chat, some praise him, while others warn him not to fall into temptation. The 2 young women approach the protagonist and urge him to enter the bath, flirting and telling him not to be shy and to trust them. In the bath, the young women massage him all over, and the viewers tell him to enjoy the moment, subscribing. Meanwhile, behind one of the maids, the sword watches the scene and starts laughing. It's revealed that the women transformed, and he had let his guard down. It turns out they are the demon twins, Kalia and Peggy, who inhabit the second intermediate realm. The 2 demons attack simultaneously, but the sword uses tentacles to restrain them, declaring they cannot touch him because he is her sustenance, and only the sword has that privilege. The young women are surprised to realize it is the sword Arux's, not understanding what is happening. Furious at Isuo for treating her like a mere knife, the sword begins draining the power of the demons. One by one, while they scream powerlessly on the ground, the twins promise to do nothing else. The protagonist, now standing, wonders about the whereabouts of the maids. For her part, the sword believes that with her increased power, she can parasitize the protagonist. However, when he grabs it, the sword tries to drain him. Suddenly, the cursed weapon feels intense pain and realizes that her magical power is being absorbed by Isuo, as if a black hole were sucking her demon soul. Strangely, the sword begins to enjoy the experience and speaks in a morbid way, surprising the protagonist, who screams, unaware the sword could communicate. At that moment, the sword transforms into Achilles' sword, which has the ability to absorb the magical power of other beings and multiply the wielder's power tenfold for 10 minutes. Outside the castle, Isuo realizes that the sword has recognized him as its master, but notices that the masochistic sword only desires for him to drain her power. At that moment, the protagonist sees something: a vast field of cultivation and a church. In the distance, Helen waves to him, accompanied by the hooded young woman, who thanks Isuo once again for saving the little one. Removing her hood, a beautiful, sensual woman dressed in white is revealed, introducing herself as Sister Teresa of that church. The nun wishes to speak with the young man. Meanwhile, in the chat, everyone immediately falls in love with her and wants to be her servant. The sister asks the protagonist if he knows how farmers can live happily without worrying about food and clothes. She adds that she built that church, reclaimed the lands, recruited refugees, and planned to farm to become self-sufficient. Moreover, several priests were invited to develop crop-growing techniques. However, every winter, people keep dying of hunger, and others become even poorer. The land seems exhausted, as the harvests are getting smaller, and, no matter what she does, she can't solve the problem. For this reason, she asks Isuo if he knows of any way to fix this. He knows she is a nun with great ambitions, and the people in the chat also notice her large, round ambitions. The protagonist, unsure of what to do, asks the viewers what it might be. Then, they summon the historian in the chat, who explains that the crop shortages are due to overplanting every year. Thus, he suggests implementing the 3-field system. Upon hearing this, Iso tells the nun that he has a suggestion to solve the problem. Surprised, she asks him to share it. The protagonist explains that it isn't a curse, but that the land is poor because, by constantly cultivating, it loses nutrients. He suggests implementing the 3-field system, dividing the land into 3 parts and cultivating only one zone at a time, allowing the other 2 to become fertile again. This would increase harvests. He adds that the unused lands could be designated for raising animals to produce meat, and that manure could be used as fertilizer the following year. He also observes that the farmers use small plows, unsuitable for the humid climate, and should switch to heavier plows to ease their work and increase agricultural efficiency. Suddenly, someone grabs the protagonist's hand, and he is surprised. She is the legendary Virgin of Silver Eyes, a genius about to reach the level of a demigod. She is the beautiful nun who had been confused for 100 years and now reveals her eyes to the savior of her people. Meanwhile, on Earth, the protagonist's sister greets an old lady at night. As she walks, she thinks her brother is foolish for sending something so strange. She takes out the bean, thinking it's edible, until suddenly the Dark Tiger gang appears and asks if she already has the money she owes. The young woman replies that the agreed date hasn't yet arrived, and that her brother is still working to get the money. But the criminals are already aware of this and have come only to collect interest. One of them pulls out a knife and threatens her, saying she must work in a nightclub with him. In desperation, the young woman throws her wallet along with a bean, but the thug ignores her pleas. The bean falls, glowing on the ground, and when they turn around, the criminals see an explosion happen behind them. The girl realizes the bean is truly magical when a massive, glowing skeleton in a black robe appears. The furious being emits a battle cry and introduces himself as the Great Skeleton Guardian. Noticing his master's blood is being disturbed by evildoers, he grabs one of their faces and, enraged, asks what they are doing. While the man cries in fear, the others try to flee, but the skeleton quickly crushes the first one against the wall and then bashes the others' heads into the ground, destroying them. Then, he emanates a powerful aura before the young woman and tells her she can summon him again if needed. The skeleton then returns to bean form, stating she can call him once a day. Amazed by the power, the young woman is now convinced her brother really traveled to another world. In the other world, at the church, it's told that a pope was born into the Silver Eyes family, and 100 years ago, a genius of this lineage arose. A nun is seen praying with other sisters. She is Sister Teresa of the Silver Eyes, who joined the hero class at a young age and was blessed by the Church of Light. But at 19, her life drastically changed. Placing a blindfold over her eyes, many believed she had strayed from the path. Thus, she left the City of Light, disappointing the church that abandoned her. As 100 years passed, the Saint of God was forgotten. Now, the nun observes the majestic, glowing heart of the protagonist, while Iso is struck by her beauty. It's said her presence is as vast as an abyss, leaving people bewildered by her gaze, while the chat is even more surprised by her body, wishing she would join the harem. The system activates an optional mission to recruit the nun, offering a reward of 200 followers and a captain's subscription. However, Iso feels unsure about how he could recruit such a powerful woman. Meanwhile, his sister, back on Earth, also wonders if he's already in a position to recruit a boss-level character. Another viewer suggests he use a trick, and the historian in the chat comments that they could win over the nun by using their heart. However, The Majestic Nun brings her chest closer to Iso's hand and asks him to stay to help her save her people. The protagonist, however, says he cannot. Reading the historian's words, he explains that even if the harvests are doubled, the system doesn't allow changes since the farmers pay very high taxes and, at the end of the year, have very little left. In the case of slaves, it's even worse, as they go hungry all year round. And if there are wars or natural disasters, the number of deaths will be immense. This would lead to rebellion, and the feudal lords would exterminate them. Since she represents the theocracy, it will be impossible to prevent the action of her class. Iso comments that he pays less than 10% in taxes in his place, and that, instead of using powerful magic to try to help the people, they should reduce taxes